Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
Hey guys, just wanted to offer you a free gift here as a part of being a listener of my show. If you go to kfmfree.com, you can get the top 30 books and top 30 success quotes that every man must live by. So obviously every show we talk about books and we talk about success quotes. And so I've compiled the best of the best out of the last 100 episodes into a short guide. So kfmfree.com and it's all yours. All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Dr. Lisa Marie. She's the author of Exaholics, Breaking Your Addiction to an Ex-Love, and she's also a Denver-based life coach and marriage and relationship counselor. So happy to have you on, Dr. Lisa Marie.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Andrew. This is great.
All right. So, Dr. Lisa Marie, we start off with every show with a favorite success quote or some sort of saying that you've lived by, maybe something from the book that'd be relevant for the topic of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one thing that, I talk about a lot of things in the book, but one is really to act from your values instead of your feelings when it comes to this stuff. And that's certainly something that I try to do, something that I teach my clients to do. And I think it's very helpful for a lot of people. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit more today.
Yeah, I think that's good. So why is it so hard to act from values versus feelings? Where's the conflict there?
Because your feelings, particularly when it comes to relationships and ending relationships, can be so overwhelming because they are biologically based. People get swept away by these emotions that they don't understand. They go through withdrawal, literally, and they begin acting in ways that are often scary to them. And that's why so many exaholics come to me thinking that there's really something wrong with them for feeling the way that they do, because they're acting in ways that are so different from how they usually are. And one of the things that people can do is really reconnect with their core values to kind of calm themselves down, refocus on what they want, and start taking their power back.
So kind of recenter them to push them towards the direction that they already know is where they want to go, which is their values.
Precisely. One thing that you see happen is that there's a big split when relationships end. People say, my heart tells me one thing, my head tells me another. I spend a lot of time in this book helping people understand what's going on in their, quote, heart, and how to get their head back in control of their results.
Yeah, let's dive into that. Let's start off with just even the title. I think it's so exaholic. Almost, are you drawing some similarity between addiction, like an alcoholic or a drug addict, as if we are addicted to the X? Is that where can you talk about the title?
Yeah. So what we understand now from modern science is that relationships are addictive. And this is a positive thing when you consider it from an evolutionary or biological perspective. We were designed to bond to other people. And there are physiological structures that exist inside of all of us to make that happen. So you have brain systems, endocrine systems that are bonding you literally, physiologically to another person. When those bonds are broken, we go into withdrawal that parallels perfectly the withdrawal that people experience when they are withdrawing from substances.
Wow. So if we're going to draw an analogy of someone who's coming off of a hard drug and they're longing for that drug, kind of like causing them to do ridiculous things, even potentially dangerous things for themselves. very similar with someone who's just broken up out of a serious relationship.
You nailed it, Andrew. There is craving for contact. There is obsessive thinking about the ex. And there is this longing to be back together for again. So people can't stop thinking about their ex. They are oftentimes doing compulsive kind of impulsive things to reconnect with them. That there certainly is a parallel to, breaking into a house. People do that kind of crazy stuff in the days and weeks following an unwanted breakup. They will leave notes and call repeatedly and send emails and texts and show up where their ex-girlfriend works. I mean, all kinds of stuff in this really almost like panicky effort to reconnect.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a very intense thing, particularly in the first few weeks. It's a protest response is the technical term for it.
And so this would be a more kind of clear, I guess, extreme example, but what would be even a smaller level of an exaholic? What are some of those signs? Like, how do you know if you're quote unquote an exaholic?
Yeah. So if you can't stop thinking about your ex, I've seen research that suggests that an ex-lover is on the mind of an exaholic like 85% of the time. So you're thinking about what they're doing. You're, having little conversations with them in your head. Also, if you find yourself not really being able to move on emotionally into other relationships, or, you kind of date, but you're not really feeling it. Your heart is still with your ex. That would be a big clue. If you are comparing your ex to other people and thinking about how you'll never find that same kind of person again, that would be a clue. And then lastly, an exaholic almost always is longing for reunion and beating themselves up oftentimes that it's their fault. That why the relationship didn't work out. Either they weren't good enough, but really at the end of the day, since they want to be with their ex again, it's like that they weren't good enough for the ex to love them well. So even if they're the ones that did the breaking up, they didn't want the relationship to be over. They wanted it to be better. And they often blame themselves. If they were better men, their women would have treated them better.
Yeah. I think right now you have a lot of guys like saying that's me. The extreme example, maybe there's a few where it's like, oh yeah, I did do that. But for this right here, it's like, yeah, that's me. Like I think about her. I even replay stories and scenarios or dates that we had together. So I'm speaking with a lot of different guys about this subject. It's something that really, really holds them back is this ex. And it's in many cases, they want to move past this. Like they're like, I don't even know why I think about her. Like I'm over. Like I know if I was to circle on a piece of paper, would I want to be with her? Yes or no? I would circle no, but I just keep thinking about her. So why are we stuck on the ex?
Oh my goodness, Andrew, I spend dozens and dozens of pages in the book, really like helping people understand why this is happening. And in a nutshell, it goes back to the way that we are made biologically. So again, there are these structures inside of you that were created for the purpose of bonding. And it takes a long time for these bonds to break, to end. And in the meantime, people are feeling terrible. I mean, you talk about guys, not being able to move on, but it can get much worse. I mean, people are struggling sometimes to function at work because they're feeling so preoccupied. They are feeling terrible all the time, symptoms that are consistent with anxiety and depression. So this really takes a huge toll, particularly in men. And one of the reasons is that I know that these are stereotypes, but I found this to be true in my practice. I don't know if you found it to be true. A lot of times, guys, instead of talking to people or kind of reaching out for support, they will internalize their problems. And so they will maybe drink more in efforts to cope with their feelings, or they will just kind of like shut down and close in on themselves. And so they're having this really intense internal experience, but they're not really talking about it. So this can be, really fairly severe consequences. And the reason, again, is because we're built to form these bonds with other people. And this happens on a level of our brain that is much older and much deeper than our thinking mind. The part of your brain that says, she wasn't even that great of a girlfriend. Why do I care that much anymore? that's not where this is happening. That is like your rational mind. The part of your brain where we attach is in your limbic brain. It's your emotional mind. And so it takes very specific kinds of things to break that attachment on the limbic level. And in the meantime, people really struggle and suffer.
Yeah. A lot of suffering there. What I've experienced from just a lot of working with a lot of different men is that oftentimes the man will say that the relationship just ended out of nowhere. It, like, I didn't see it coming. Things were great, but like in his view, it's like things were great. Like, we're doing this, we're planning this trip, and then I found out that she cheated on me, or I found out that something happened, or that I came home and the ring was on the table with a note. It was like this sudden thing. What I'm finding, I'd like to get your opinion on this is that the breakup didn't just happen suddenly, but that it happened months or even a year ago in the woman's mind. But she needed a lot of time to gather the courage to be able to make the decision final.
Yeah. Well, honestly, that's the way that all breakups end. One person decides that the other is not who they want them to be or need them to be. And so they distance themselves emotionally. That's when, a unilateral kind of breakup happens, is when one person initiates it. And yes, you're absolutely right. Frequently inside that other person, they are making peace with it, making sense of it. And to, the person who is broken up with, it can feel like it's just sprung on them. And the shock and the trauma of that rejection can be absolutely enormous. And a lot of times exaholics, part of that obsession, that rumination that follows is just trying to figure out what happened, replaying all these different events in their minds, trying to see if they can figure out what shifted or when it shifted. Because, oftentimes they're not going to get those answers from their ex. They're really left on their own to try to figure it out. And it's very hard.
Yeah. And it's like she starts emotionally detaching, or that can happen, like you said. This can go both ways, but one party starts emotionally detaching, and when that happens, it's the other party who will then start chasing and causing the other person to even move away even further, which is what I've seen with kind of a common theme amongst breakups.
Yeah, and you're describing the protest and withdrawal sort of response, which I also talk about at length in the book. And, in every relationship that is troubled, you see these kinds of attachment cycles breaking out where one person is working really hard to try to connect or communicate with the other. And when that other person perceives them as being aggressive or threatening, they oftentimes withdraw in response. A lot of times men in relationships will actually take that withdrawn position. Not all the time, but frequently women will actually be the instigators of conflict, and so kind of pursue their men to talk about things. However, when that stops, and women like give up and say, you know what, you're not listening to me, nothing's going to change, we can't even talk about this anymore, they'll give up. And that is actually when women do end relationships, is when they stop trying to talk about stuff. And so then when that happens and they pull away finally, you see men kind of reemerging to chase after them and attempt to get them to reconnect. Yeah. So I want to definitely go into like a path to recovery, because I'm sure there are guys listening like, are they going to talk about how they're just like pointing out, I know I am those things, but let's say there is a guy who's not kind of in this exact conversation we're in right now, where he's not in a breakup, but he feels like the relationship is trending downward, and that if he doesn't do something, or if something doesn't change in the next few months, that a breakup is going to happen. Like, what would you recommend for the man to? Should he give her space? Should he confront this? What are some suggestions that you have for this man? Yeah. Gosh, Andrew, there are so many different variables. And right. I'm putting on my marriage counselor hat here. But I tell you, I think it's always a safe choice to simply ask and say, hey, I feel like we're not as close as we used to be. Is something going on? Is there something that you need from me that you're not getting? And just attempt to talk about it. Because a lot of times, it could turn into a conversation where there's a lot more connection, a lot more understanding. Maybe she does open up and say, yeah, this is what's going on with me. And it turns into a solvable problem. I think when it's really hard is when, especially when people are dating and just getting to know each other, is that, one person might just not be that in to the other person. But how do you say that? Because, I talk with people all the time, women who are dating men who might be wonderful guys, and they can articulate that. He's such a nice guy. He treats me so well. We have so much fun together, but I'm just not feeling it. And that is when, people do try to avoid conversations. They're like, what am I going to say? It's just going to hurt his feelings, Whereas in an established relationship like a marriage, it's much more likely that you would get a coherent conversation or that you could do something with.
Yeah. Got it. I think in that situation, when the girl says he's such a nice guy, I think that's the problem right there. But that's sometimes a different conversation.
we could address that if you wanted to. I have my theories, but yeah.
Go ahead. What is your theory on the nice guy? I feel like the nice guy is a big challenge. Like at first, the woman can find the guy. He's got great qualities. He's great on paper, but the nice guy is really yearning for the validation and the approval of this other person, and it can cause some challenges further down the line, which is, I believe, in many cases, what it leads to so many breakups.
Mm-hmm. I've certainly seen that happen. And so what we understand about relationships, going back to this central idea that relationships are addictive, okay? There are different levels of addictiveness in different kinds of relationships. And what we know is that relationships that are a little bit unpredictable, a little dangerous, that raise anxiety as opposed to lower anxiety, actually create more interest, more intrigue, and like more juiciness when it comes to the addiction than people that are kind of calm and predictable. And a lot of it has to do with sexual chemistry. So in the early stages of a relationship, when romantic interest and lust is kind of spinning around in people's heads, it's very exciting. And that infatuation phase is kind of what locks people together to develop a longer term attachment. But if a relationship just doesn't really make a woman feel interested, if it isn't addictive in the sense that she's wondering about him or worrying about it a little bit or craving that contact, it's not really going to give her that sense of chemistry that might make a relationship continue. And so what you see, unfortunately, is that the most addictive kinds of relationships are often the most toxic kinds of relationships. So relationships centered around affairs or infidelity, or relationships with people that are inconsistent and kind of mercurial. Those sorts of relationships tend to be much more intense and much more difficult to get over than relationships that are kind of calm and reliable and people know what it is. And so I hope that helps some of your nice guys kind of make sense of their experience.
It certainly does, because the nice guy is predictable. Mm-hmm. He is safe. He's not going to say anything that's going to push the boundaries. Right. And he's not going to fully express himself or say exactly what he wants or express his desires in order to avoid conflict. And then sometimes that, like what you're sharing, conflict kind of the ups and downs, a roller coaster of emotions is sometimes beneficial to the longevity of that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the gas that throws on the fire, and that fire of romantic passion will always kind of, die down eventually if you've been in a relationship for more than a year or two. However, it's the bonds of attachment that will smolder for decades. But without that early heat, there's nothing to kind of bind people together frequently. And so, I think that sometimes people are surprised. And another thing that I talk about extensively in the book are the different aspects of your brain and the different parts that are implicated in the stages of love, which are lust, romantic love, and then attachment. And so people are sometimes surprised to think that, attachment and bonding are completely different from lust and romantic attraction. And actually the things that create, healthy, stable, long-term relationships will, throw water on lust and romantic feelings. So there are very different things happening. But I think people educating themselves around what love is, how it works, all the different moving parts can help them, understand how to use it for their own benefit, whether in a relationship or as they're recovering from one.
Yeah. Let's go into recovery. We shared symptoms of an exaholic in the beginning and things that someone would be going through at an extreme level and then also at a more kind of subtle level, but still a problem that's holding them back in their lives, both romantically with other women and even just in their personal life. What's a path to recovery that someone could take?
Well, I think first of all, you used the $1 million word, Andrew, and that is recovery. Alcoholics are recognized as having like an identifiable thing that they need to work on. Drug addicts, obviously. But until now, people ending relationships have just gotten platitudes. They're like, get over it, or she wasn't good enough for you, or try Match.com. That's all that people have gotten. And there has been no recognition that what they're going through is just as serious and profound, maybe even more so than if they had an addiction, an unwanted attachment, if you will, to drugs or to alcohol. Because what we know now is that the brain systems that nature uses to bond you to another person are actually the very same ones that get artificially stimulated by recreational drugs. For example, the reason why cocaine works on you and is addictive is because it's recruiting the brain systems that make you feel so excited about somebody in early stage love. And so because of that, this is such a powerful experience, is that to really recover, needing to understand, first of all, that you are going through something that is on the order of any other kind of addiction helps you shift it. Because an exaholic, before making that shift in thinking, will just be thinking about their ex, wishing to reunite, cataloging all of their flaws, trying to figure out what happened. That is sort of like the first stage, is where they're stuck in it. But as soon as that shift happens and somebody says, wait a minute, my attachment to this person is actually the problem, that's when they can begin to empower themselves to do some things a little bit differently to try to get a handle on it. So it changes the relationship that they have in their mind with their ex, and they move out of denial, which is that we should get back together phase, into, my continued attachment to this person is a problem and it needs to end, because that's when they can start to actually make changes that will detach that bond.
And when they make that decision, they come to that conclusion that this has got to end. This has got to stop.
Right.
I want to detach. Are there physical things that someone can do? Should they have a conversation with this person? Should they write a letter? Should they, what are some physical things that person can do?
Well, I tell you what, the actual leading up to this is a process in and of itself. The first step of Alcoholics Anonymous would be to say, hi, my name's Joe and I'm an alcoholic and I'm not going to drink anymore. It takes a lot to get to that point. And so what somebody in those early stages of recovery, who's maybe not quite ready to achieve abstinence, might do would be to talk to other people, a community. There are online support groups for people who are going through the same thing. And that can actually be very, very helpful in helping people kind of just develop the understanding of what's going on and the motivation to eventually detach. Talking to a therapist or a coach to try to help them make sense of this can be one step that people can take as they're mustering up that motivation to detach. Many times people will need to go through a testing sort of process to make sure, is this really over? Is there any hope left? So that's when they might be talking to their ex, writing letters, seeing if they'll go to counseling together or something like that. They're testing it out to see, is there anything left here for me to work with? And they oftentimes have to go through that until they really prove to themselves, nope, this is really over and it needs to be over. And then once people do that, then they can move on to really that next stage of recovery, which is abstinence and actually working with the cravings themselves. So this is a multi-stage process, and that's why it's hard to give just a pat answer. I try to lay it out in a much more articulate way in the book. So if you need more specific direction. But Shall I go on about the second stage?
Yeah, I think just going briefly touching on the stages so that someone who is experiencing this challenge has some direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So once you've kind of gone through that first stage and determined that you really do need to detach and that there's nothing really left for you here, then you can move on to the second stage, which really involves abstinence, which is not initiating contact with your ex. We can't control whether our exes reach out to us or not, but you can control whether or not you reach out to your ex. And that one step is incredibly empowering because it helps prevent you from kind of getting zinged by the addictive sorts of explosions that happen when you're in contact with your ex. So eliminating physical contact is very helpful. Oftentimes, too, eliminating your ex from social media can help break that addiction, because when you're getting pinged by information, and this is what they had for lunch, and this is what party they went to, and oh my gosh, this is how hot they look with their girlfriends or whatever. Whenever you get that kind of information, it triggers all of those old feelings and actually works in your brain very much the same way it does if you are in physical contact with them, which perpetuates that addiction. And so to eliminate as much contact with them as possible.
Yeah, just to insert, in Facebook actually just came out with a new option for breakups to make it easy for you to block them without having to delete them. But what do you do in a situation where she actually is struggling too, and isn't so sure about the breakup? But I've seen in many cases where the woman is kind of reaching out back to the man, not necessarily trying to get back together, but obviously there used to be a lot of sexual chemistry, so just coming back together, and they're just hooking up. And sometimes I'll talk to guys, or I'm working with men, and it's like, I really don't want to, but I'm still attracted to her. We've known each other for years, and we're still hooking up. And I'm not really talking to anyone else. Like, what do you think about? What are your thoughts on that situation?
Yeah. Well, it's comfortable, and he's maintaining that attachment because, when people finally do let go and move into stage 2 and say, we're over, we're never going to be together again, and I can't have any more contact with you because it's not good for me, that's terribly painful. And so, people maintain contact with exes that they know aren't really good for them, that they know aren't good long-term partners, to avoid going into that pain. So it's the most natural thing in the world. And I would suggest this hypothetical person has some work to do in that stage 1 part, where they're really wrapping their heads around, what do I need to be well? What kind of relationships do I want to have in my life? And how is this relationship getting in my way of being able to create that? When they come to terms with the need to move on, then they can really begin the work of healing. But what you're describing is a guy who's still really in that purgatory, that limbo, of not together but not apart. He's an exaholic. Yeah. That's what it looks like.
So he's got to turn to his values and maybe come up with a decision here. Is he going to, maybe this will rebuild or rekindle, or is he going to look at this and say, hey, I've got to move on?
Yeah. So absolutely. Connecting in with those values, thinking about, who am I? What do I need? What do I want my life to be like? Does this match or not? Are there opportunities to fix this relationship and work with her to make it into something that will make us both happy? And if not, at some point, you do have to say, just like, you would say, this drinking thing isn't really working out for me anymore. I'm not getting totally drunk and losing my job, but this is making me feel bad. It's creating negative consequences in my life, and perpetuating this, quasi relationship is also preventing me from being able to go out and find a better match, or feel good about myself again, or just have peace of mind. When people do that work and come to that point where they're able to say, I'm done, then they can really begin the healing process, which starts with abstinence.
Yeah. And what would be the next step in the healing process, the recovery process?
Right. Well, there are a couple different ways to answer this question. So when I wrote Exaholics, Breaking Your Addiction to an Ex-Love, I really used a 12-step model
Okay.
to help people. And a 12-step program is a self-help program. And so people reading this book and doing the work on their own, there is a process outlined for them. This work might look a little bit different if they were doing it with a therapist or a coach. So there are kind of two answers. I can tell you what is outlined in the book, and I can also talk a little bit more about, what I do with my clients that might be a little bit different. But in general, the very first step after people say, enough, I'm done, this is over, we can't have any more contact, I know that this isn't going to work out, setting that boundary for once and for all usually precipitates grief. People can minimize grief while they're still kind of harboring closure fantasies and they're still kind of talking to that person. There's still that connection. When that ends, people usually get thrown into grief. And that can be difficult, it can be painful, and it can also be profoundly healing, because to really grieve and mourn the loss, the regrets, that is how you really work through things emotionally. And that is important work for people to do along the way of their healing process. To get the help of a community, to get the help of a friend, a counselor, a coach to do this work with you can really help you move along the process. At the very least, make a sacred space for you to do this work in terms of journaling, taking some time for yourself, but really giving yourself permission to not be okay for a while, because this is hard work.
Yeah, this is where, and you alluded to it earlier, but where I think a lot of men will struggle is it could be seen as, like you need other people, like you can't do this alone. Men often will try and deal with challenges by themselves. And a breakup is a serious breakup, especially if there was many years and if there's children involved and like all this, it's a very big deal. It's a divorce or a serious breakup is like a death of someone that you shared a part of your life with at the closest level possible, intimately and relationshiply. Yeah, and men not reaching out for support. And I like where you said, give yourself permission to say like, hey, I'm in some pain right now. I'm not doing too well right now. And there's nothing wrong with that, and that it's a part of this healing process.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love what you were saying and what you pointed out so beautifully, and which I go to great lengths to discuss in the book, is the power of attachment, the need, the literal need that every human has for attachment. This is true for men and it's true for women. From the moment that we're born, we are made to bond to other people. The first people you do that with are your parents, but then in adulthood, we do that with our significant other. And for many men, their partner is their primary attachment. And for some guys, they don't have a lot of other people in their lives. And so to lose that primary attachment, I would actually say that it is a emotional trauma that can be much more severe than a death, because in a death, it happens. You can't get mad at cancer. As tragic as it is, it's nobody's fault. But when people feel rejected by their core primary attachment, it is such a profound emotional trauma. And here's the rub, Andrew, is that the way that human beings cope with trauma and with loss is by turning to other human beings. That's how we survive. We are a collective species. Not one of us is made to go through this alone. And if you have a person who has just lost their primary partner, the only person they have to turn to in these times of distress, not only are they going through the worst trauma a human can experience, which is disconnection, but they've lost the only person that they have that could provide them comfort. It's so that the object of their distress and their trauma is at the same time the person that they could have helped them emotionally. And, sometimes, not always, but sometimes women can have other close friendships in their life so that they can turn to those people to help them get through it. But unfortunately, too many men are just alone in the face of this. And I think that that's why so many men have such a hard time moving on, because they can't do the work of grieving by themselves.
Yeah. They might be surrounded by other men, like in business or at work, but not feeling close enough or the ability to be vulnerable with these other men,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just, for many men, that vulnerability is just a very, very tough thing to do.
Absolutely.
And so when you lose that one person that you could be vulnerable with, it can cause even further distress and make it even harder. So again, I think it's so important for men to reach out to people that they like, their family, other close friends, and work to being able to get to a level where you're saying and sharing with them, like, I'm not okay. You check in with me.
Men are vulnerable to what everyone is when a relationship ends, which is this myth in our culture that we should just be able to get over it and move on.
Right.
You know, that's what everybody believes should happen when relationships end. And the fact that, 98% of people going through this, that isn't their reality, that they actually come unglued in the aftermath of a breakup.
Right,
It
right.
makes people think that there's something wrong with them for having this experience. And that makes it even harder to reach out, to talk to others when you're going through this kind of thing. And so definitely talk to your friends, talk to, people who care about you. But also, if you start getting platitudes back around, get over it, move on, she wasn't good enough for you, you might need to bump it up and talk to somebody who can actually hold this space for you. So a support group dedicated to breakups and recovery, there's exaholics.com. There are other breakup focused groups where there are people in that same emotional space who will have more empathy for you, or a counselor or a coach who's really well versed in this process, the recovery process, and has an addictions model to understand these kinds of things. That person can also just hold the space for you and temporarily be that attachment, that person that you have a real relationship with that you can go to work through this stuff, because it's very difficult to move on to the later stages of healing if you aren't really able to access the emotions involved in a safe way. And we need connection in order to do that.
Yeah. As men growing up, it's like, walk it off. You get hurt, just walk it off. You just get back up, and it's going to go away with time. It's going to heal on its own. You don't have to do anything. Just walk it off. Be a man. But unfortunately, that's not.
I'm having such a reaction right now. I would like to,
I was going to say that's just not it doesn't work with relationships. Go ahead.
Well, not with anything. And you know what? And so this is exaholics aside, just as a therapist, okay? I've been a therapist for a decade. And what I want everybody in your audience to hear is that men are just as emotionally alive as women are. Men are just as vulnerable. They have all the same ranges of emotions that women do. They've just been socialized out of it. So I just want to do something to dispel this myth that men should be able to walk it off. I know that's what they're trained to do, but I talk to men. They are just as hurt and sad and frustrated as anybody else are. But it's hard, I think, for them to talk about it, particularly with other men. And that is such a tragedy. I'd love for that to change. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now, Andrew. Take it away.
No, that really good. And I think that's triggered a big message for a lot of guys. And that alone is just a powerful message for someone to walk away with who's experiencing a breakup or is maybe on the verge. So after grieving and kind of restoring faith in other people, kind of building that support system, what should they do?
Well, then, step by step, there is a process that it really encompasses many different things. A lot of it is working on repairing self-esteem. Many people who go through this experience come out the other side with their self-esteem just kind of mangled. So really, working on your self-esteem, getting reconnected with those values again around what do you want your life to be like in the future? And then there are different things that you can do to start moving towards that. The emotional work, a lot of work around forgiveness, oftentimes, forgiveness of your ex, also forgiveness of yourself, also learning from the experience, what can I take away from this relationship? Either, what I did or what I tolerated, what can I learn from so that I'm not replicating this in the future, and really getting clarity around what a healthy, meaningful, and positive relationship feels like for me. And then once you have those pieces together, then you can begin to redesign a life that does have love in it and take steps towards trusting again and opening your heart back up. That's the final destination.
Yeah. A lot of times, actually probably all of the time, we'll look at a breakup as a crisis. It's a crisis in someone's life. And in Japanese, the word crisis means danger plus opportunity. And what I like about that is that in every crisis and in every breakup, it's actually an opportunity. You did go through some tough stuff. You did lose someone that you loved. It is tough. But on the positive, you have an entire life ahead of you where you just went through this challenging thing and got some of the most invaluable lessons you'll learn about yourself and life and relationships. And now moving forward, you get to experience it again. You get to create a new life. You have more time. You have probably more money. You have more, space to create something new. And I think just in life, like, it's really about having, as many amazing experiences as we can possible. And that's on the positive side of a breakup.
Yeah. I think that, when people are really healed from a relationship addiction, from a drug or alcohol addiction, a lot of times what I'll hear them say was, that sucked. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. That divorce changed my life. It exposed all the fractures and the unfinished business in me and in my life that I then had the opportunity to fix and to heal. Or going through that recovery process grew me as a person, and I became someone that I never even would have dreamed a year or two ago. Thank goodness that happened. It's when the trauma actually turns into like one of the best things that ever happened to you. And you say, that was good. That is really when you can embrace the full power of healing and use it as a trajectory, as a launching pad to this whole next chapter of your life that's honestly, for most people, much, much better than the reality of the relationship that they had been in.
Yeah. I was just working with a man last week, and it was a divorce, and we were able to get to the conclusion that where he was able to say, if I was ever to see my ex again, if I was walking and saw her at the grocery store, I would get mad. I would probably throw an apple at her. Like I would get angry. But now, today, he said I would be able to just look at her, smile, and say thank you, and respectfully just be able to walk away and not have to have some episode or continuation of how the fight went or that. So I've seen, just from my own personal experience, that the more, not that this is good, but the more breakups that a man has gone through, and obviously a woman too, that if he's able to have a smile on his face, like a guy who's, let's say, picture a guy who's been through 3 divorces and he's just miserable, or a guy who's been through 3 divorces and he's smiling. Both have gone through the same exact experience, but one was able to reflect, learn, grow, and become a much more powerful version of himself because of the crises. Just like his perspective, like the way that he viewed the breakup. But one could be destroyed also. But having gone through the same thing, I think a lot of it is just perspective. Like, how do you view this instead of it being a detriment to your life, or being a victim for many, many, many years, or being an exaholic for many, many years, being able to take the lessons and use them to be the grounded man that I know so many the listeners are working towards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your perception of reality shapes your reality. The way we think has an immediate impact on the way we feel. And to get in control over what you're thinking, how you're thinking, it changes everything. It changes the way you feel. It changes the actions you take. And then it ultimately changes the results you get. You're right on.
Got it. I really like this. This has been a really good episode. I wanted to get into a part of the show I call the knowledge round. Just going to ask you a few questions in here, but really going to pull out some good insights about, probably going to be more about yourself on your journey in this session. So are you ready for the knowledge round? Cool.
Ask away.
All right, guys. If you're not reading books, then you're getting left behind. Somebody spent their entire life learning some invaluable lesson. And the best format that anyone could ever put it in is a book. It's the shortest, fastest, simplest way to consume content. So I know there are so many books available, and we talk about books all the time on the podcast. So there must be so many running through your head, and you're wondering, where do I begin? Well, I've compiled the top 30 books and success quotes from all of my guests in the last 100 episodes. So you can get them all for free. If you go to kfmfree.com, you can simply download the top 30 books that every man must live by. Again, that's kfmfree.com. Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime. All right. So, love what you're doing, the book, and even taking a look at your website. You have a lot going on here. Really seem like you're on purpose is what I'm getting. And what advice would you give to someone who is feeling lost and kind of not having a sense of direction in their life, just kind of doing the same thing Groundhog Day?
Think about what's important to you. Think about what really gives your life meaning and purpose. You know, I got into this career as a result of that. I had been doing something that I wasn't really that into, and terrible tragedy, but I actually lost my cousin on 9/11. He worked in one of the World Trade Center buildings, and a plane crashed through his window. And on that day, I thought, what am I doing with my life? I could die at any minute. I mean, how bizarre and random was that? So none of us are really safe. And what do I want my life to have been about? And it really catalyzed me to do some important soul searching around what makes me feel meaningful and like I'm doing something of worth in the world. And for me, that's being of service to other people. And there are certainly lots of ways to go about that. But for me, just with my blend of, whatevers, I decided to go to counseling school. And so use your not just heart's desire about what you want, but who do you want to be and what makes your life feel meaningful and purposeful to get clarity around what your path might look like. That's the first step that I advise for anybody. I do that with all of my coaching clients and therapy clients who are in that space of indecision, and it is very helpful for them.
Yeah, I like that. Really getting that clarity. And of all the men you've helped with, you've worked with, what would you say is a common, like one of the biggest challenges that you've identified with men that you work with? A common theme of what's holding these men back?
Wow, let me think about that. Well, men are all, they're all snowflakes. So there's no thing. You know what I actually do notice with men, particularly, and so my specialty is relationships, right? So this is going to be more relationship focused, but a common theme, holding men back in relationships. Men, particularly nice men, good men, they oftentimes, men get flooded in any kind of conflict. So you can look at a man having a conversation, with a woman, and maybe it's a little intense. They look so peaceful and calm, and they look like nothing is affecting them at all. But if you actually put a blood pressure cuff on them right there in that second, they are getting flooded on the inside. Okay, so they're having a big emotional response. Right. And so what you often see is that men in situations that they perceive as, quote, conflictual, which many women perceive as conversational, honestly, they start to get really elevated and flooded. And so they, in order to protect the situation, in order to not make things worse, in order to not have it turn into a big yucky fight, they tend to kind of shut down and oftentimes not say what they're feeling. And they will suppress their needs. I found many men to be very self-sacrificing and will really endure a lot in service of their relationships and in service of their families until they get to a certain point where they either freak out and start yelling, or if it's a very advanced case, they just withdraw from the relationship entirely. And so there's a long march to either of those places. And so I would like to encourage men to work on emotional regulation skills, and just talking about how they feel in the moment will help them avoid either of those destinations, either getting really angry or withdrawing from a situation.
So sharing what's really going on, like not like dropping the shield. It's kind of like, like you said, he's like on the outside, he looks like he's very calm. Wow, this guy's a strong guy, but he's got a shield up and he's not showing what's really going on. He's not, or even expressing what's really going on in a, respectful way, not like an emotional outburst, like,
Totally. I mean, I'm starting to feel upset right now.
Yeah, as simple as that. As simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Really good. And so you read a ton of, read a ton of books on this journey. What would you say are, let's just say 2 of your most influential books that you recommend to men in your practice?
Ooh, where to start? Okay, so a great one for relationships is called Hold Me Tight. Hold Me Tight. The author's name is Dr. Susan Johnson, and she talks a lot about the emotional experiences of people in relationships and really does a wonderful job of demystifying relationships. I recommend that book frequently to men because I think it really helps them just to understand what's happening in their relationship from an almost mechanical kind of perspective. Because when they know how it works, men are often very good at being able to fix it. And so that really creates a wonderful blueprint of how to do that. Another one that I recommend both to men and women is by Dr. Helen Fisher, and it's called Why Him, Why Her? And what she talks about is how there are different personality types that are very biologically based, and how certain kinds of personality types are more compatible than others. And it might surprise you as to which ones are, but I think a lot of times for men understanding, and women understanding the differences in those personalities can help each other have more tolerance and more compassion and more appreciation, and help them work with each other as opposed to against each other. So I think those are 2 great books for men.
Really good insights. I'll be checking those out right now, putting them on the wish list. So This next one's more of a scenario. Lisa, so imagine you're looking at 20-year-old Lisa. Think about what she's doing, that kind of thing. What would you tell her to do if you had 60 seconds with her? And what would you tell her not to do?
This is I don't mean this with a shred of conceit at all, but I tell you what, I feel very happy and satisfied with my life. I have a wonderful husband. We've been married for almost 20 years. We have a family. I love what I do for a living. I have a great business. And all of that is a direct result of the steps that I made along that way. And there were lots of times when I was younger that I suffered and I had self-doubt and I went through difficult things. But looking back now, every single one of those taught me something so valuable and important, I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah. What point in your, when would you say you got to that realization where, actually things are good and those things were needed? Did that happen when you started getting into your practice, or was this something, was there an aha moment where that occurred?
I don't think so. I think it was a sort of a gradual shift over time. And maybe it's just becoming older. I don't know. But really understanding that where you sit today is a direct outgrowth of where you've been and the choices that you made along the way. And my husband lately, we're coming up on Christmas. He keeps asking me, he's like, what do you want for Christmas? What do you want for Christmas? And I'm like, I don't want anything. And again, it's just, I think maybe coming from a sense of gratitude or just appreciation of what you have. There wasn't an aha. I think it's just really, just cultivating peace and appreciation. I'm sorry. That doesn't sound like a good answer.
No, I'll find the nugget, which I like when you really said, he's asking what you want for Christmas, and you can't really think of, maybe a coffee, nothing really dramatic. You can ask some people and they'll give you a laundry list of, they know exactly what they need. But I think where you're coming from is just a place of exactly gratitude and kind of a peaceful place where things are good. You like where you're at. And that's awesome. That is so awesome.
Well, and honestly, one of the things that I write about in the Exaholics book is my own traumatic breakup. And I did that for the purpose of illustrating the fact that we all go through this, okay? There's no such thing as a exaholic that is different somehow than anybody else. It's just, this is an experience that every single one of us goes through at some point or another, and it's harrowing and it's horrible. And so in writing through my own experience and illuminating that as one example example of many of what kinds of things happen to people. I think even just that small example of having gone through something that at the time was so incredibly difficult, but that, it helped me, I think, have more empathy and compassion for people and gave me the opportunity to really understand what's happening and be in a position to be of service to others now, which again is the most meaningful thing for me. So, I'm so grateful now for having had that experience. And I guess that's what I hope for your listeners too, is as they walk through their own, valley of darkness, that they really, it grows them as people and it helps them become the people that they were destined to be and gives them opportunities to do things in the future that they literally would not have had without having gone through that.
Yeah. Would you say that right there, just that last statement is very much like your philosophy for a happy or a successful life?
Oh, absolutely. The name of my practice in Denver is Growing Self. And I founded that practice based on the entire belief that everything that life throws at us is simply an opportunity for us to grow and develop. And so that has been the foundation of my therapy practice, my coaching practice. That's what I do with couples. And that's the way I view my life too, is that we all have opportunities, and it's what you do in those moments. As Tony Robbins likes to say, I'm going to butcher this, it's in your moments of decision, I think, that your destiny is shaped. And so, when you have a crisis, do you look at it, as you say, as an opportunity or as just destruction, and looking at it as a growth moment and saying, okay, yeah, this sucks, this is hard, but it's developing me. It's like putting yourself through a furnace where you become, forged into something else over time. That's what this is all about, in my opinion.
No, it's great. I really like it. I like it. It's very empowering. I think for a lot of listeners, we've kind of gone starting off with symptoms of an exaholic and going through these grief, different stages, and having taking them through a process of recovery, and then ending with a note on growth. And the opportunity that lies in front of you. Because I know someone's listening and they're in a lot of pain, and that this was just listening to this, it's not like they're just healed right away, but it's given them hope that there is a way out, that life does get better, and that they're not stuck in this what did you say, like valley of darkness forever. Yes. There is a way out, and it's great. I'm glad that you shared a little bit about how you did go through something as well, and you shared also, like, man, things are great, family, you're loving what you do for a living. So that's a great story there. That's going to conclude the Knowledge Round. Really powerful episode and Knowledge Round. So what's exciting you today? Like, what's really getting you out of bed? Maybe things you're looking forward to in 2016.
Oh, well, okay. So what I'm working on today, I am updating my happiness class, which I'm very excited about. It's an online class where I teach people how to change the way they think and the way they feel and the way they behave in order to create genuinely, authentically happy lives. I am going to be doing a few more classes coming into 2016, and so I'm very excited about that. And let's see. Nothing other than that. Really, my true passion right now, Andrew, is talking to people about breakups and recovery and what it means to be an exaholic and the hope that there is for feeling better, because, so many people for such a long time have had to go through such a heartbreaking and lonely and isolating experience all on their own, and with nothing but, again, platitudes or sometimes even contempt. And finally, we're having a different conversation, recognizing this for the addiction that it is, and being able to offer people some real meaningful help and support and guidance, and even just like validation and recognition that what they're going through is actually a thing. People haven't even had a name to define their experience until now. And I think just even that right there, and the knowledge that there's nothing wrong with them and that, they can get through it, that is truly my passion, because I feel like it's bringing a lot of support and meaningful help to so many people. But again, that ties back to my number one value of service, and just to bring comfort to people is where it's all at for me, honestly.
Yeah, really good. And for all the guys listening, check out Growing Self. kfmfree.com. You can follow up with Dr. Marie here, Lisa Marie, and her book, Exaholics. Just go to Amazon, type in Exaholics, or you can type in her name and it pops right up. I just did it right now. This has been such a great episode, so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing the lessons from your book and even bits and pieces of your journey. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I've really enjoyed talking with you. So thanks again for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and 1 million downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement, and we've just started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a review in iTunes. It really helps to grow the podcast. Guys, 2015 is the official year of living with purpose, where every day you do only the things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. Check out kfmfree.com to get free tools I've created to help you crush life. Again, that's kfmfree.com. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, and I'll see you in the next episode.